The 600-pound beast grabbed the 200-pound cub and threw it into the air. One by one, these small monsters are like this, regardless of life or death. They are forcibly thrown by the flood giant beast towards the Garo position. Such a sudden and brutal attack method. It makes Domi somewhat panic. She suggested ordering Archer to take down the opponent in advance. However, it was vetoed by Jim. There's no need to waste Archer's energy on these minions and such airborne targets. The effect of arrows is also minimal. It's time to test the strength of the wizard team. He immediately gave the order. 2 wizards were assigned from the wizard team to be responsible for defense. 2 wizards quickly took off their cloaks, revealing their wands, and began chanting spells. In an instant, clusters of icicles shot up from the ground where the monster was about to land. This made it so that the monster had nowhere to avoid them, experiencing a chilling and exhilarating sensation through their hearts. A few fish have slipped through the net. They were then caught by the door guardian beast protecting the mage. Without saying a word, they were immediately given a free return ticket. This move is tantamount to provocation for the giant flood monster. His temples bulged with rage instantly. And Jim was actually inspired by this. He immediately ordered the door guardian beast to continue to act in accordance with the previous plan, in order to lure the flood army into the prearranged ambush area. Domi also reported the situation on the field at this time. Yellow Dragon is holding the line in the middle lane for now. However, after the enemy General Zack was killed, it led to the enemy's central forces dispersing to both sides. They are now launching attacks towards the weak defenses on our left and right flanks. Our defense line is almost at its limit. Should we activate the trap immediately? After a moment of contemplation, Jim ordered Bo to lead troops to defend the right side, and Yellow Dragon was redeployed from the middle lane to the left side. Their intention is to plan to defend the trap at all costs. They will wait for the big fish to take the bait before closing the net. Just at this moment, Lisa, who has been out investigating Flood Dragon King, also returned. From her anxious expression, it is estimated that she did not bring back good news. At the same time, a loud trumpet sounded. Instantly, the previously noisy battlefield fell into silence. They all stopped and looked in amazement. They were deeply moved by the scene before their eyes. Lisa, this is the news you need to report. Yes, Master. Our enemy, led by Flood Dragon King, has arrived with his main army. There are 150 monsters, with the rest being commander-level behemoths. Additionally, there are over 30 projectile-type monsters. After listening to Lisa's report, Jim, though he remained calm on the surface, couldn't help but feel a bit nervous inside. This means that the current combat is just against the enemy's vanguard forces. In this way, just based on calculations, the number of commander-level gigantic beasts on the enemy side alone exceeds the total number of soldiers in the Garo Labyrinth. What's worse is that it's only 2 hours away from the labyrinth reaching level 5. Many of his techniques also need to wait until the labyrinth is upgraded before they can be implemented. The key now is that we must endure these 2 hours. On the other side, following the direction pointed by the Flood Dragon King's raised hand, the messenger immediately understood and blew the horn again. Suddenly, the entire army of monsters stopped their advance. Then, one by one, the monsters knelt down and surrendered, allowing the commander-level behemoth to capture them. Shortly after, they were vigorously thrown out by the behemoth again. Countless monsters then appeared in the sky, plummeting towards the Garo camp. Seeing this situation, Jim could no longer sit still. He immediately stood up and ordered to concentrate firepower on the enemy's airborne forces. Make sure Archer holds on, as the time to activate the trap is not yet ripe. At the same time, he also ordered the mage to reinforce the surface of the trap with ice. It seems that he intends to lure more monsters into the trap before taking action. But before long, Domi reported that the mage's magic power was about to run out. This made Jim feel regretful, because the commander-level behemoth that entered the trap area has not yet passed halfway. But at this point, we have no choice but to issue the command to activate the trap. Without the support of magic, the originally hard ground suddenly becomes loose. In an instant, the monster that had just been charging forward also realizes that something is amiss. But before they can react, the next moment, they have already fallen into the trap with countless casualties. Some who were lucky enough to climb up using their companions' bodies encountered Bo, who had been waiting for a long time, resulting in a fierce battle with the monster. This led to a sharp increase in casualties in the Garo labyrinth. But the battle results were quite fruitful. Just the traps alone killed 20% of the enemy's main forces. The terrain on the battlefield has changed at this point. Due to the two deep bottomless pits on both sides, only a narrow passage remains. This passage leads to the Garo labyrinth. He immediately ordered Yellow Dragon and Bo, two saviors, to guard the passage. The rest of the soldiers were rearranged to form a shield and spear formation, in order to reduce the impact of the airdrop troops on the camp. At the same time, she reported all the moves of the entire army. All of them were instructed to target the weak spot under the monster's jaw. Jim's successive deployments and responses have long left Lisa amazed in secret. She couldn't help but ask aloud where Jim had learned these military tactics. This question caught Jim off guard. As a senior internet user, these are just basic operations in online games. There's no need to make a big deal out of it. Unexpectedly, his words stirred up huge waves in Lisa's heart. It's too scary. Humans actually treat war as a game. This interpretation is somewhat excessive. She might not even have heard of the term, online game, before. Suddenly, a violent tremor came from below. Then, the right wall of the Garo labyrinth. It seems to be struck by a terrifying force, penetrating from the inside out. With a cry of surprise from Domi, a huge and monstrous monster suddenly leaped out. It roared at them furiously. A terrifying monster with fierce horns suddenly crashed into the city wall. It appeared in front of everyone. Lisa immediately recognized it. It was the siege beast raised by the Flood Dragon King. However, the surprises were far from over. Along with the billowing smoke and dust, another pair of centaurs burst out from the hole that had been smashed open. What is this again? They each wielded long swords with the speed of ghosts. Without any hesitation, they slashed directly towards the Garo camp. Before a few of them could recover from the consecutive changes, they discovered that a siege beast was roaring and charging towards their direction. In the blink of an eye, Jim steadied his mind and ordered in a deep voice. He ordered all of Garo's subordinates to retreat to the second line of defense. At the same time, he instructed the door guardian beast to assist. Bo, who was guarding the right side, blocked the group of people and horses that were rushing in recklessly. But Domi is worried that Bo's strength may not be sufficient to resist. He suggests deploying the Yellow Dragon directly to battle the enemy. Who would have expected that the left defense line guarded by the Yellow Dragon is also in a precarious situation at the moment? It can be seen that as soon as its dragon breath stops, the defense line may collapse instantly. At this critical moment, Lisa took the initiative to volunteer for battle. Master, that team is the ace force of the Flood Dragon King. Each of them possesses the strength of elite monsters. And I found Axel in the team. With Bo's strength, he definitely won't be his opponent. So let me go assist Bo. Since she joined, Lisa has still felt that Jim does not trust her. So she made this move to prove herself. Jim hesitated for just a moment before agreeing to Lisa's request. Jim then gave a shocking order to Domi. But with the situation critical, Domi dared not ask any more questions. She immediately conveyed the order to the group of mages. Just as the combined effort of the mages was displayed, a massive ice sculpture rose from the ground. Faintly visible within it, a terrifying red light flashed across the ice sculpture. The ice sculpture, propelled by the mages, shot up like a giant snake. The next moment, it crashed heavily into the enemy's main forces, splintering into pieces of ice. It also harvested a group of monsters in passing. But even more terrifying is the extremely raging murderous aura rising from the smoke and dust. immediately followed by a deafening roar. This moment made the monster present shudder. "Master, what should we do if Vermilion Panther jumps at us now?" Meanwhile, Jim has activated parasitic form. "Don't worry. I have released my aura. If it dares to come over, I don't mind beating it up again. Although we cured it, we also starved it for 5 days. I believe it will make the right choice." The Vermilion Panther actually sensed something behind it a long time ago. That presence made it tremble with fear. It turned back and took a deep look. He launched an attack against the monster beside him, seemingly venting his full of grief and anger. With the Vermilion Panther joining now, they temporarily resisted the main attack of the enemy forces. This will allow Jim to free up some time to deal with the siege beast. Immediately, he turned around and punched the chair into pieces. He reached out and grabbed fiercely. A huge hammer suddenly appeared in his hand. Immediately after, in Domi's astonished gaze, he channels energy around his body. He swings the giant hammer towards the siege beast. The mighty hammer strikes heavily. The siege beast instantly screams in pain as its skin splits open. Unexpectedly, the siege beast, despite being severely injured, does not stop in its tracks. It simply ignores him. Jim was startled and thought to himself, things are not looking good. Is its target really Domi? He immediately shouted out loudly, asking Domi to hide quickly. Domi immediately heard the sound and hid inside the Garo labyrinth. In the blink of an eye, the massive siege beast fiercely rammed into the entrance. However, due to the small size of the opening, the siege beast got stuck halfway through. Jim was extremely anxious at this moment, shouting desperately for Domi outside the cave. At this moment, Domi's voice entered Jim's mind. She was lucky to have survived, and she discovered that the siege beast's target was not her. Its target is the core of the Garo labyrinth. Upon hearing this, Jim immediately realized the seriousness of the problem. On the other side, Yellow Dragon only felt a lightness in his body. He was actually lifted up by Jim with all his strength. Instantly, he was shocked to his core. "Can Master please speak gently? I have a fear of heights. Go stop the siege beast from entering Labyrinth Jim, and then I can't be bothered to talk to him anymore. Just throw him out directly." "Master, don't go. You must be joking, right?" Jim's voice came from behind. "You are a true-blooded dragon. What are you afraid of?" This sentence seems to possess a magical power. It makes the yellow dragon's divine light shine brightly and doubles his confidence. No matter what means you use, even if you have to hug its thighs or pull its tail, you must stop it at all costs. I never thought that the yellow dragon would really resort to hugging thighs. Meanwhile, the battle is intensifying and getting tense. Thanks to the Vermilion Panther, Garo's soldiers have safely retreated to the second line of defense. However, there is still a continuous influx of paratroopers being deployed into the defense line. However, the elite force that infiltrated caused 20% of the Garo camp's soldiers to be injured or killed. On the other side, Bo and Lisa are besieging the elite Captain Axel. But even in a 2-on-1 situation, they are still in dire straits. They are both injured. The only one who seems to feel fortunate is Vermilion Panther here. He relies on his agile speed and powerful claws. He steadily holds the mid lane. Now he is even charged into the Flood army, singing loudly all the way, enjoying eating, killing, and having a great time. The monsters of Flood army have been terrified by him. The Vermilion Panther pounced again at a monster. Unexpectedly, he was smashed in the mouth full of fangs by a sudden punch. Immediately, a huge hand lifted him high into the air. "Little thing, who knows what flavor you will be after being roasted?" As soon as the words fell, an extremely terrifying dragon breath erupted with a bang, blasting several tens of meters away. Wherever it passed, everything turned into ashes and smoke. Along with the destruction, half of the soldiers from the left flank of the Garo camp were also annihilated. This horrifying scene happened to be witnessed by Domi, who managed to escape from the labyrinth. She hurriedly shouted to Jim that the Master Flood Dragon King was coming down to the battlefield personally. The ferocious monster was merely a piece of meat in the eyes of the Vermilion Panther. Just as the Vermilion Panther was killing recklessly, it was suddenly hit by a punch that shattered all its sharp teeth. Strangely, the heavily wounded Vermilion Panther showed no sign of resistance. And just like that, it obediently got picked up by the giant hand. In full view of everyone, he was burned to ashes by dragon breath. The tremendous impact caused by the terrifying dragon breath. The stunning crowd on the battlefield couldn't help but stop and watch. The huge figure exuding a fierce aura all over its body. This made Lisa realize the appearance of the Flood Dragon King. This must also be when its monsters launch a full-scale attack. The upcoming battle will be even more fierce. Currently, what she and Bo need to do is to delay Axel as much as possible, waiting for Jim to defeat the Flood Dragon King. And Jim has already dodged and blocked the Flood Dragon King's advancing steps. I thought it was going to be a high-stakes battle between kings that would erupt at any moment. Didn't expect that the Flood Dragon King would start trying to recruit allies at this moment. However, he responded to him. Jim angrily struck him without saying a word. As expected, his powerful blow didn't cause any harm at all. Instead, he almost lost his grip on the huge hammer due to the strong impact. He activated Spy Eye to scan Flood Dragon King while his body was falling. Although he was mentally prepared, the result still caught him off guard because he couldn't find any weaknesses at all. Even the joints or scales, and even parts like the eyes, are extremely tough. On the other hand, it seems that the Flood Dragon King did not immediately get angry or attack Jim. I originally wanted to find you a reason to survive. After all, I am also very curious. How did a human become the Lord of Garo? Unexpectedly, Jim did not want to chat with him. Instead, he directly made sarcastic remarks. He is just trying to bluff and bluster. He is only trying to cover up the fact that he is afraid of human weapons. As soon as these words were spoken, the Flood Dragon King seemed to be hit in a sore spot. He immediately roared in anger and fiercely threw a punch. The violent and overbearing force exploded, shattering countless pieces of rock in all directions. Jim, who narrowly escaped unharmed, shot out from the smoke and dust. He felt a lingering fear and sighed in the dark. It was terrifying how such a huge figure could move at such a speed. Suddenly, a giant claw appeared seemingly out of thin air and moved closer. He realized there was no way to escape, and his mind flashed for an instant. Terrifying tentacles instantly covered his body. He stubbornly withstood the Flood Dragon King. The sudden heavy blow scattered the smoke and dust. Just as he was about to fight back, he suddenly felt a wave of scorching heat, which was just a stone's throw away, was coming straight towards him. It was the terrifying dragon breath flame sprayed by the Flood Dragon King that engulfed Jim's figure in an instant. Domi, who had been paying attention to the battle on the field, watched as Master fell into such a dangerous situation. Unable to contain the fear in his heart, he could only turn to the yellow dragon beside him and speak sternly. "You were just hugging the thigh. Why did you come back to hug the tail again? Are you capable or not? It's not easy to hug the thick thigh of the siege beast. The size at the end of the tail is just right for hugging." He was just pretending and acting very busy and diligent. This scene made Domi even more furious. Between sentences, two strange figures moved as fast as ghosts, flashing out from the smoke. Flood Dragon King immediately reached out to try to grab the two figures, only to find that he had caught only slimy tentacles. The two ghostly figures. They have now leaped high behind the Flood Dragon King, only to see the two figures, with eerie movements, converge together. Immediately, he grabbed the giant hammer and aimed it at the back of the Flood Dragon King's head, smashing down with a bang. The deafening sound reverberated all around, like a bolt from the blue on a sunny day. The Flood Dragon King also seemed to be severely wounded by this strike. He endured the intense pain and swung back with all his might. He knocked the huge hammer out of Jim's hand. However, a bizarre scene occurred again. Jim's right hand unexpectedly transformed into tentacles, wrapping around and pulling back the fallen huge hammer. At the same time, his left hand also transformed into tentacles, wrapping around Flood Dragon King's arm. He used his momentum to swing, and reappeared behind Flood Dragon King. He then grabbed the giant hammer, and delivered a powerful and forceful blow. He intended to use the hammer to smash the Flood Dragon King's brain. And this close-quarters combat style also renders Dragon Breath useless. He then replicated it with equal skill, relying on his mysterious methods. He moved swiftly around the massive body of the Flood Dragon King, succeeding time and time again. At that moment, the Flood Dragon King suddenly generated a powerful wave of energy throughout his entire body. Next, a dark purple pillar of light shot up into the sky. Jim, who had fallen to the side, was now full of shock. However, the monsters belonging to the Flood army on the battlefield were not excited to see the scene. Instead, they were all extremely terrified. They turned around and ran as if they wished they had 2 more legs. Their actions naturally caught Lisa's attention. She thought it was Jim who defeated the Flood Dragon King, resulting in the current situation. She turned her head to look at Axel, who was confronting them. "Your army is already in disarray. Are you still going to stubbornly resist?" But she did not expect to be met with Axel's mockery. "In fact, it should be you who should flee. At the same time, I should also thank your Garo Lord. Let me see the Flood Dragon King going all out once again. He is a dominant power entrenched in the depths of the earth, possessing formidable strength comparable to that of gods. He still retains some Dragon Clan bloodline, making every part of his body incredibly sturdy. However, after being beaten by Jim, his head was a mess of cuts and bruises. The Flood Dragon King had no choice but to activate its second stage transformation in anger. Seeing this, Jim immediately activated Spy Eye in his parasitic form. He was surprised to find that after the transformation, the defense was no longer impeccable as before. It showed multiple weaknesses, obviously in order to gain stronger offensive capabilities, giving up some defense. Since he discovered the opponent's weaknesses, Jim started planning his own strategy. Suddenly, the system pop-up issued a warning of a lethal threat. Without waiting for his reaction, the fatal blow from the Flood Dragon King had already landed. In a moment of life and death, he instinctively raised his hand to block. However, he was still sent flying by the sudden heavy blow, crashing heavily into the rock wall. However, just as Jim appeared with his injured arm dragging behind him, the attack of the Flood Dragon King came again in quick succession. He hurriedly exerted force on his feet and leaped to the side. He took advantage of the situation and kicked the Flood Dragon King in the face. This kick didn't cause much physical harm, but was extremely insulting. Flood Dragon King was immediately annoyed. He turned his head and unleashed a strong 100-year dragon breath. Facing life and death once again made him break out in a cold sweat. No time to think. His left arm instantly transformed into tentacles and pierced the ground. He used his inertia to pull himself, causing his body to plummet. This narrowly saved him from a disaster. Jim dared not be careless anymore. The moment he landed, he immediately took up a defensive posture. The Flood Dragon King's successive attacks seemed to indicate that he had no intention of giving him any chance to catch his breath. He originally planned to use close-range combat to prevent the Flood Dragon King from using Dragon Breath. But after transforming, the Flood Dragon King's speed has also increased significantly, leaving him with no solution at the moment. In the meantime, the Flood Dragon King unleashed another powerful move. Numerous energy-infused orbs exuding terrifying energy were spewed out from its mouth, rushing towards him to attack. At this moment, Jim found himself trapped in an unavoidable deadly situation. The parasite also seems to sense that the host's life is being threatened. Automatically unlock the skill, Cognitive Speed, for him. However, this skill, it actually consumes a large amount of parasite's health. But he can't afford to delay using the skill at the moment. A subtle sense of observation immediately swept through the body. Everything around seemed to become extremely slow. It's as if time has slowed down several times. At the same time, he also felt his body being emptied and becoming increasingly heavy. If this symptom persists for about 10 days to half a month, it may not recover. It seems like this is quite a dangerous life-saving skill. We shouldn't delay. Hurry and escape. But this guy is also bad. He fled to the army of the Flood Dragon King. Sure enough, under his leadership. Of course, there is also the tacit cooperation of the Flood Dragon King. He successfully caused countless deaths and injuries to the innocent Flood army. Now it is finally understood when the Flood Dragon King transforms. They understand the reason why the monsters of the Flood army have to retreat and flee. Suddenly several breaking sounds came from the smoke and dust, accompanied by strong winds. Unexpectedly, the Flood Dragon King merely swept it away with a casual motion, shattering the long spear. But Jim's posture at this moment made the Flood Dragon King feel deeply insulted. He, a top big shot, was actually being provoked by someone with a toothpick. This is intolerable. With a loud shout, his figure swiftly approached, and a fierce claw struck down. But Jim quickly dodged the attack. At the same time, he took the opportunity to control his tentacles, and fiercely swung the spear out. Flood Dragon King was unable to dodge, and was hit one by one. He was humiliated by being slapped in the face again. Flood Dragon King was immediately filled with uncontrollable anger. The right claw, engulfed in a fierce aura, suddenly thrusts out. It is determined to crush Jim with one claw. Jim did not dare delay even at such a close distance. He immediately triggered his high-speed skill. At the same time, his arms transformed into tentacles and grabbed the huge hammer back. Immediately, his figure did not retreat, but instead surged under the Flood Dragon King. Following that, he leaped up. He heavily smashed down on the knee joint. This heavy blow made the huge body of the Flood Dragon King tremble. He immediately couldn't bear the damage, and he knelt down on all fours in front of Jim. It seems that you, this dragon, still have some innate talent to become a lizard. 3 or 4 times, I was insulted by the humans in front of me. The accumulated anger of the Flood Dragon King has reached its peak. But he is actually waiting for a chance to make a deadly blow. The current moment is a perfect opportunity. He suddenly raised his head and breathed out the dragon breath that had been brewing for a long time. Unexpectedly, as soon as he opened his mouth, several boxes were delivered to his mouth by tentacles. Those boxes were high-explosive bombs specially prepared by Jim in advance. At the moment when the scorching dragon breath came into contact with the bomb, it exploded. The effect of the bomb completely surprised Jim. He guessed in his heart that the Flood Dragon King would either be dead or severely injured this time. Suddenly, a drastic change occurred as a giant mouth broke through the smoke and dust, attacking fiercely. Between the lightning speed, Jim immediately triggered the extreme speed skill. However, this time the skill did not respond. It turns out that after the previous use, Parasite's stamina was depleted. It has fallen into hibernation. In a moment of distraction, he was actually swallowed by the Flood Dragon King. At present, he is truly at his wit's end. He can only raise his hand to resist with all his might. The strong desire to survive in his heart makes him unwilling to die like this. But without the blessing of Parasite, he simply cannot move the Flood Dragon King with his own strength. Watching Master being devoured left Domi's mind blank in an instant. She collapsed to the ground, as if losing her backbone. Seeing Master in such a state, the Flood Dragon King's face was filled with a victorious expression, unaware that the situation was far from over. With the end of the last 3 seconds, Garo Labyrinth successfully leveled up to level 5. A series of system pop-up prompts followed closely. Repair all damage to Garo's body. Restore Parasite stamina. Parasite has awakened from dormancy. In the darkness, Jim seemed to be taken over by Parasite. Protected by a vertical eye canopy, he slowly emerged. In order to survive, He held on in the mouth of the monster for a full 3 seconds. Only by doing so could he turn the tables and be reborn. Just when the Flood Dragon King was complacent, thinking that Jim was eliminated, suddenly, a drastic mutation occurred. In a violent tremor, the Garo labyrinth expanded several tens of meters. Unexpectedly, the entrance widened as well, giving the siege beast an opportunity to charge in, penetrating several meters into the interior. The yellow dragon was unable to stop it at all. The anomaly in the Garo labyrinth caused an inexplicable sense of unease to rise in the heart of the Flood Dragon King. The next moment, an irresistible force pushed open its huge mouth. Jim's figure suddenly appeared between the sharp fangs. Taking advantage of the Flood Dragon King's momentary shock, he swiftly escaped from the giant mouth. But how could the Flood Dragon King be willing to let him go so easily? The food that was supposed to be in the mouth of the Flood Dragon King had escaped like that. It flailed its claws and roared, pouncing towards him again. But how could Jim just sit and wait for death? He seized the opportunity and forcefully swung his arm. He once again accurately threw the explosive into its mouth. A violent explosion rang through the world. The fallen Jim hurriedly reopened Spy Eye, because he knew that even if the bomb exploded in the mouth of the Flood Dragon King, it wouldn't cause much harm to it. But the brief experience of being swallowed by the Flood Dragon King earlier gave him a vague hint about the deadly weakness of the Flood Dragon King. The current actions are to confirm his conjecture. The reality before his eyes indeed matched his expectations. He immediately made up his mind. Axel's arm holding the sword was broken by Jim's sudden attack. Next, he manipulated the tentacles to coil around Axel's sword. It seemed like this sudden move was only to snatch away the long sword. Unexpectedly, Axel, who had lost an arm in pain, endured the intense pain and fiercely threw a punch. However, Jim swiftly turned around and slashed down with a sword, instantly cutting Axel into 2 halves. With such ease, Axel was killed. This refreshed Lisa's perception of his strength to an unimaginable level. On the other side, Axel's subordinates had already discovered the situation where their leader was killed. They immediately rushed towards Jim from all directions to attack. But they didn't expect to give Jim a perfect opportunity to turn the tables. This bizarre and shocking scene left Lisa and Bo stunned. What's even more chilling and frightening is, tentacles actually sprouted little ugly heads. It stretched out a huge mouth and devoured all of Axel's subordinates. Taking advantage of this opportunity, Jim signaled for Bo to hand over the long sword in his hand. Just as Jim reached for the sword, Lisa seemed to have discovered something terrifying. She screamed in alarm. Jim immediately realized the danger. He decisively activated his high-speed skills. Suddenly, everything around him slowed down immediately. At this moment, the claws of the Flood Dragon King were within reach, but they were falling down at an incredibly slow speed. Jim immediately sank his waist and stood up, and the energy around his body instantly circulated. The surging power suddenly soared. Lightning danced all over his body. In the next moment, he moved as fast as lightning and attacked the weak point on the neck of the Flood Dragon King. He raised the big knife in his hand and aimed at the neck of the Flood Dragon King, fiercely striking upwards. The tremendous impact force caused the Flood Dragon King to involuntarily lift its head. The direction in which the dragon breath was about to spew from its mouth suddenly veered off. Right after, his body turned, leveraging the inertia to swing the large knife in his hand in a circle, slashing towards the neck of the Flood Dragon King. Although this blow did not sever the neck of the Flood Dragon King, it made the dragon breath abruptly stop. At this moment, the tentacles on Jim's body are also not idle. They wield several long swords towards the Flood Dragon King. At this moment, they stab at the neck, slicing flesh and breaking bones. The Flood Dragon King, in pain from the relentless attacks, continues to howl. Taking advantage of this opportunity, Jim leaps up high once again with his knife. In the blink of an eye, the Flood Dragon King's head flies off as Jim's knife falls. There is still an incredulous expression lingering on his face. Just at this moment, a system pop-up window popped up. Parasite is initiating a request to devour the Flood Dragon King. After pondering for a moment, he unexpectedly agreed to Parasite's request. Isn't he afraid that Parasite will retaliate against the host after becoming powerful? In an instant, a head several times larger than Flood Dragon King's head appeared out of Jim's body and devoured Flood Dragon King's head. The dominant force in the underground labyrinth thus fell into silence. For a moment, each belonging to the Garo labyrinth surges with excitement, cheers, and jubilation. But at this moment, no one noticed the changes happening quietly on Jim's body. Tentacles attached to it. They have turned into a set of rock-solid scales. This is a defense skill gained after Parasite devours the core of the Flood Dragon King. It's effective, but not very appealing to look at. At the same time, there is still a big problem unresolved. The siege beast is now less than 3 meters away from the core of the labyrinth. The Garo and Baby Snake are fearlessly blocking around the core. Unexpectedly, a system prompt sounded. The massive body of the siege beast disintegrated and dissipated amid wails. This doesn't seem to be Jim's doing. It seems to be the autonomous defensive ability possessed after Garo Labyrinth reached level 5. On the other hand, the monsters of the Flood army may have lost their courage due to the lack of suppression from the Flood Dragon King. One by one, they have fallen into madness, engaging in self-mutilation and cannibalism. Jim coldly watched the scene in front of him. It was time to put an end to everything before him. The center of the heart moved at will, and the central hub of the labyrinth immediately lit up with a dazzling light. In an instant, dozens of level 5 Garo defenders emerged from the light, in the direction pointed by Jim's blade. The members of the Garo labyrinth suddenly became excited. They wanted to avenge their fallen comrades, slaughtering all the invaders. The man that the monster just swallowed turned out to be stickier than chewing gum on teeth. Who would have thought that in the end, the man would be beheaded by the man? His own men were also killed. After the battle, the control system quickly compiled data. Over 400 enemies were annihilated in this battle. The captured spoils of war were countless. Except for Mage Garo, there were no casualties. The number of deaths and injuries among other troops was as many as 50. Almost half of the total casualties, which made Jim deeply saddened. He proposed to build a cemetery. May the sacrificed warriors receive eternal honor. His actions greatly shocked Lisa. No wonder the soldiers of Garo Labyrinth, even when facing enemies 5 times their number, they still fight fearlessly. They fight to the death to defend their position. Just as Lisa was lost in thought, Jim asked about her injury. She then moved her arm that had been healed by the priest, indicating that it was fine now. And she suggested that the most urgent thing for Jim now was to set off immediately. You go take over the Flood Dragon King's giant dragon labyrinth to prevent other monsters from getting there first. Upon hearing this, Jim immediately decided to lead the troops there. This is a shortcut dug by the Flood Dragon King earlier to attack them. It only takes half a day to reach the giant dragon labyrinth. Just as they were about to set off, they saw Bo carrying a sinister-looking creature. Isn't this the underground black market merchant to whom he sold the parasite before? This guy is really well informed. At the same time, he is also curious about the purpose of his appearance. Unexpectedly, the black market merchant didn't waste any words this time. He actually spoke directly, wanting to purchase the body of the Flood Dragon King at a high price. That's great because Jim still has a lot of spoils of war to sell here. But this is not actually the real purpose of the black market merchant's visit here. Only to see the black market merchant fumbling in his pocket and producing a box. He immediately flipped it open. But the item inside surprised Domi greatly. It is an exquisitely crafted ring. Then a series of system prompts sounded. Jim was appointed as the Underground Baron. Garo Labyrinth belongs to its legitimate territory. Intelligent creatures in the Underground Labyrinth cannot penetrate into Garo Labyrinth. Jim Baron is qualified to establish the Order of Knights, and enjoys the authority of lesser nobility.